Stay, Kratos. Just a bit longer.
Well, that's certainly a way to start a video, isn't it? The good old days, back when games tried to prove that they can be mature by having a dark mood, lots of violence, and a sex minigame. Arguments can be made that this minigame is supposed to be satirizing a quite raunchy Greek mythology, but I'll be quite harsh here and say that's giving this scene too much credit. It's just for titillation. And experience points. Anyway, this is God of War, a 2005 action game developed by Sony Santa Monica. It's a satisfyingly violent romp across a world based on Greek mythology, with a fair share of classical tragedy thrown into the mix for good measure. In fact, if you believe some of the reviews of those times, God of War is literally the best thing to happen to Greek mythology in modern times. The best way to experience God of War is through the 2009 PlayStation 3 re-release, which is the source of the footage you see. It plays the game in HD and at a full consistent 60 FPS. The PlayStation 2 original is also a very fine way to play with its variable frame rate that aims for 60 but usually stays at around 40. And if you don't like yourself, play the Vita version with its surprisingly low sub-30 FPS gameplay, not great for such a fast-paced action game. I usually don't focus on frame rate that much, but that, resolution and trophy support are really the only differences between the versions, as otherwise they're all the same game. My name is Stanislav Costiuc, I am a game designer, and this is my review of the original God of War, which as always will be done with the help of my Stasocritic Scoring system, starting with design. This is the most important part of Stasocritic. It has the biggest weight, that of 4, as the way a game is played, built and structured is what defines your experience the most. God of War is one of those games that focuses entirely on one aspect – visceral combat. That's the pillar of the experience. Of course, the game does feature bits of exploration, platforming and even puzzles, but those exist to break up the pace between the actually important to the game fighting. And let me tell you, the combat in God of War feels pretty amazing. The game utilizes a whole number of game feel elements that makes fights with even the simplest of enemies immensely satisfying. Just take a look at this footage. There's so much going on here, from the obvious elements like the way your chain blades swirl and the effects that are attached to them, the orbs that fly toward you from enemies, to details like the controller vibrating, action pausing for a millisecond after strong hits, and longer animations being accompanied by a slow motion effect for maximum impact, to of course the sound design, music, and quite frankly the amount of blood and gore and dismemberment. The latter are of course not a requirement for combat that feels good, but in this particular game it certainly is an advantage. In a way, God of War goes for a full sensory overload. It uses every trick in the book it finds a spot for, far more than any game should do really, because it's just so easy for that to become really tiring and just go numb from all the action. But God of War makes it work, and that's largely due to the pacing structure that was mentioned before. Different gameplay bits vary the pacing. More than that, there's barely any game feel elements barring those which are needed for comfortable mechanics put in these sections related to jumping or searching for treasure. So during these breaks, your brain gets to rest from the barrage of stuff happening on screen during combat. As a bonus, the contrast between combat sections and other parts of the game also plays a role in making fighting feel satisfying. Another very important part is the fact that the core combat mechanics follow the principle of whatever the button, cool shit happens. You can literally press almost any combination of actions possible in whatever order you'd like, and it will look great. It doesn't matter what you do, as every button press will give you this sense of power that transforms God of War into a very enjoyable action experience. This is also the aspect that makes it easy to overlook quite a lot of smaller flaws that prevent the God of War combat system from reaching its full potential. Now, a combat system doesn't have to be extremely deep or technical to be good, and I'm saying this because some might find God of War fights lacking in skill requirements. They are, but when you have a game where any button press leads to something awesome, that's just how it works. In such cases, it's really important to provide avenues for skill mastery and even more so to be consistent, and God of War has some problems with that. First, let's talk about attack cancelling. You can get out of almost any attack combination with a block or dodge roll. The problem is this almost. God of War is fast-paced, and while it is fine to have some specific powerful attacks that can be easily interrupted by enemies who did not time them properly, in the case of God of War the issue is that some combos arbitrarily don't let you cancel their animations. It feels bad because the skill mastery element here really transforms into learning which button combinations not to press. As with so many other choices present, there is no reason to go for those if you want to improve yourself and make sure you can always dodge or block when needed. The rage meter fills up very slowly, there is no way to turn it off after activating, so in the end you sort of end up hoarding it for a long time while trying to find the perfect arena to use it in. Rage mode does become much more enticing to use once you upgrade your Blades of Chaos to maximum level, at which point you have unlimited magic while it's active, but that only exacerbates the hoarding part. Some enemies have to be grabbed for special finishers. You have to be incredibly precise with a bunch of these grabs, even on larger creatures like Minotaurs. It's very easy for creators to just miss the grab. And once you do grab them, if the minigame is about pressing face buttons in a certain order, usually it's fine, but anything related to button mashing or rotating a stick has very strict timers. God forbid you be a tiny bit slower than usual. And that is if I don't mention the weird fact that almost all button prompts appear on the center of the screen, but when you have to mash a button, the prompt appears in the corner and it can become easy to miss. The grabbing to activate finisher being so precise contrasts a lot with how the circle button works when it uses the Blades of Chaos. For example, when you have to smash a Cyclops by grabbing their eye with the blades, the action can be activated from a very generous range, as is the action to harpoon enemies to the ground when you launch them. Except that sometimes the creatures get launched too high and the harpoon move doesn't work. Again, inconsistency. Then there is the matter of enemies telegraphing their attacks. A lot of their animations are accompanied by VFX, but some aren't. And if in case of larger creatures that's fine, when enemies are human-sized, it is really easy to miss someone launching an attack in the midst of, well, the whole sensory overload on screen. There is also no consistent way to break the guard of enemies, which becomes a problem later in the game where they start blocking a lot. They also start coming at you in pretty large numbers, and counterattacking after successful parries becomes less and less useful because enemies can just block those hits. And as a cherry on top, a number of control choices are a bit weird. Mainly the dodge and the right stick, which you can and will get used to, but honestly having to move your finger away from the face buttons and back again every time you want to dodge is not great. Also, there are situations where you have to mash R2, and mashing a trigger is far from ideal as well. All these issues are magnified by the fact that Kratos' toolkit is actually not that useful. The Blades of Chaos you start the game with are obviously great. The two best additions you'll receive are the Blade of Artemis weapon and Poseidon's Rage spell. Blade of Artemis is really nice because it is a total opposite of Blades of Chaos. It's slower and can be used only at close range, but packs an incredible punch. And Poseidon's Rage is just a great area of effect attack. Other skills though? Medusa's Gaze is great against lower tiered enemies, I'll give it that, especially with some of the upgrade related combos, but then later down the line you need a lot of magic to turn more powerful opponents into stone, and there's almost not enough time to break them before they get free. The lightning bolts are incredibly situational, and the Army of Hades is... well, I suppose it's fine, but it's very expensive for the effect that it provides, until it reaches the maximum level, that is. At which point it also becomes very useful against the final boss. And speaking of bosses, there's only 3 in the entire game, which definitely feels a bit lacking for this 8 to 10 hours adventure. But each provides a very memorable experience, so can't call them bad by any means. Even though the aforementioned final boss is pretty flawed design-wise, becoming giant-sized and then going into psychological warfare inside your own mind is still nothing short of memorable. What lack of bosses does expose though is also a fairly small variety in enemy design, or rather how their design affects your player behavior, and most of the time that's not by a lot. Some of the most memorable enemies are the Gorgons, and that's because sometimes they try to turn you into stone, so you have to act quick, either dodge around or try to deal with them before their spell works. But even then, there are Sirens, which are essentially Gorgons that don't turn you into stone but also can't be air-launched. This leads to a situation that even when enemy composition is varied up throughout your journey, you're not going to feel that big of a difference between the fights. Because of these combat flaws, you're most likely going to resort to the basic square-square-triangle combo you have from the beginning. It has the perfect balance of speed and impact. Later in the game you'll get another combo that might rival it, but nothing beats the good old square-square-triangle. So while the combat in God of War is certainly fun and feels great, it does lack polish from a mechanical perspective. Combat is nothing without actual places to fight in, which leads us to level design. Now, most of the time arenas themselves are really nothing special in terms of gameplay, flat surface with enemies going at you. Does God of War need anything more? Well, technically not really, although a larger arena variety would be appreciated, given that God of War during its combat encounters tends to send a lot of the same type of enemies at you. Architect's Tomb is a great example of an interesting arena with enemy composition that takes advantage of it, harpies and archers. Sewer levels are usually awful, but here they provide pretty good arena space as well. Athens Town Square has you fighting against some cyclopes while the crowd of scared civilians is running around. But most of the time though, you will encounter plain field arenas that send 1 to 3 enemy types at you. Which isn't bad necessarily, but the farther you go, the more pacing is hurt and combat overstays its welcome. The game sending the same type of enemy at you over and over again is not that big of a deal in the first half of the game, but the closer you get to the end, the longer these situations become. Have fun fighting tons of Cerberus pups in a row. Have fun fighting tons of Cyclopes that just keep popping out. I've mentioned Architect's Tomb as a very interesting and memorable arena, but even it overstays its welcome. The harpies just don't stop coming. Even the thrilling game feel elements can't save from uncommon monotony in these fights. The second purpose of level design in God of War is to create a grand sense of scale to go hand in hand with the epic feel in combat, and here the game certainly succeeds. But what I really appreciate in God of War is the sense of place. Most of the levels actually loop into one another, with the connective points providing the possibility to access new locations after you come back. For example, after your initial fight with the Cyclopes, you'll have to revisit Athens Town Square several times throughout your journey across the city besieged by Ares, and each time something changes. This simple looping structure makes it feel like a real place. Sure, the real Athens was nowhere near cliffs or a huge desert, but in this particular case, I personally don't have anything against such artistic interpretations in the name of grand scale. The Temple of Pandora often loops back into its central chamber, and thanks to progress in other rooms, each revisit unlocks the next piece of the puzzle, that being the entire rotating room itself. And look, one would say that the puzzles in God of War are rudimentary at best. Platforming sections are also rather basic, it's either beam walking or some jumping, sometimes a combination of the two. And exploration really amounts to noticing paths branching out from an otherwise mostly linear level design. But it's important to understand that we don't look at any parts of that in a vacuum. What God of War needs is just enjoyable enough sections that make sure combat doesn't become monotonous by being the only gameplay type you will encounter. And it provides those enjoyable enough sections. I honestly can't fault the game for this. In fact, there are some really nice things that God of War does within its paradigm, like for example there's actually more chests that hold items expanding your health and magic than you need. So you're not punished for missing some, and if you have been thorough and have collected everything, then the extra eye or feather chests will give you experience orbs instead. Deep exploration is not the point. But there's still a little treat for attentive players. Muse keys that are hidden better than the rest of the treasure chests in the world, and these particular keys will lead to a special final health and magic upgrade that you can't get by collecting Gorgon eyes or Phoenix feathers. This showcases a smart understanding of the game's scope and priorities. However, what I can fault the game for is how it handles a number of its space breakers. There's a situation where you have to move a box to be able to jump to a certain ledge. The catch is that there's a time limit, and when you run out of it, a bunch of spikes will come out, destroying the box and killing you in the process. Your timing here has to be perfect. Even a second of dilly-dallying can cost your life. There is a segment where you have to avoid moving walls underwater. Again, your timing of swim boosts has to be perfect, otherwise you'll get caught by the wall and then smashed to bits. These very sensitive requirements clash with the principles of the game, really. There is another box and ledge related challenge, one where you have to push the box opposite to the movement direction of a conveyor belt, while enemies are attacking you. And it's fine if one or two enemies appear, but they just don't stop. The game decided that it needs multitasking, and it has implemented it in a quite annoying way. There is a point where you have to freeze a Minotaur on a specific floor button. Let's just say that getting the damn Minotaur in place is already tricky enough with their behavior, but also the game can just bug out and not open the door, the button for which is clearly pressed. But nothing beats the pain that is the Path of Hades, a level that is literally full of rotating beams with spikes that also change speed and direction regularly. And if that's not enough, should you fail, you usually restart pretty far away and have to do everything all over again. I died so much during these sections that God of War proposed that I lower the difficulty level, but not without mentioning that it affects only combat. Thanks for nothing, I guess. Oh, but that's not all. There's jumping across moving platforms while constantly respawning archers try to shoot you. That's still not all, as you'll get to two big climbing sections that rotate and have just tons of knives. Nothing in the game has prepared you for these obstacles becoming so prominent and important. If in the previous examples it feels as if God of War sometimes forgets its own direction and principles, then in the Path of Hades it just throws them out the window. It's a shame that some of the most frustrating parts of the game are those that don't have anything to do with its core experience. And the core experience of God of War is really straightforward, violent and thrilling combat. The game succeeds at making it feel fantastic, but it's not without a fair share of problems either. So should we open up all the scores for design, I will assign a 7 to God of War. Despite its amazing game feel, combat has a bunch of mechanical consistency issues which can lead to overuse of similar and monotone tactics. Enemy design isn't great, there is a distinct lack of bosses, and while the level design overall is good, there is quite a lot of segments between the combat sections that, in attempts to be original and provide varied experience, are actually just needlessly harsh and punishing or otherwise frustrating to complete. And then there's the Path of Hades. God of War has a really solid action game core and a lot of aspects that are done well, but also there's quite a lot of space for improvement. Now, let's move on to context. This category has the weight of one, as it's about things that enhance the experience rather than define it: plot, characters, motivation, arcs, etc. Just like the gameplay itself, the contextual part of God of War is very straightforward, and that's far from a bad thing. The reason why this category is not called narrative is because it's not as much about intricately woven storytelling as it's about a qualitatively defined world, its people, your place in it, why you do what you do, and so on. From that angle, even the quiet pandering sex minigame makes sense in a way, as this pure objectified lust stands as a desperate attempt to silence the nightmares and guilt our main character Kratos couldn't get rid of in the 10 years of his service to the gods. I'm not going to reveal what these nightmares are about to avoid late game spoilers in case you haven't played it, but suffice it to say that God of War is a well-crafted tale. It establishes the main character as sort of a dick, who becomes an even bigger asshole throughout the journey, making more and more monstrous decisions to complete the goal of killing the God of War Ares himself. And while this goal was bestowed to him by Athena, whose city is under siege, Kratos has a personal vendetta against Ares as well. But there is a reason behind this madness, why Kratos became the person we see at the beginning, how his selfishness and arrogance has eventually transformed him into a very broken person that's also full of rage. That being said, Kratos is not devoid of introspection, but it's too late to go back.
By the gods, what have I become?
God of War has a very small character cast, but everyone has their specific role in the fabric of the story. Even the nameless ship captain whom Kratos is not interested to save at all, an important point that establishes the anti-heroic nature of the character, which also serves as a setup for a dark humor punchline closer to the end of the game.
You again?
So in short, God of War does have everything it needs. Gods using people for their own means, tragic backstories and outcomes, twisted spins of fate, all that within a properly established structure. There is even a bit of lore spread throughout Pandora's Temple that incorporates all these elements behind its backstory about a character you'll never even see alive, but who still in a way is a reflection of Kratos and hints at his possible fate. The writing might not be outstanding, but it's fine, and one aspect I appreciate is that despite the tone of the game and the amount of violence in it, there is absolutely zero swear and curse words. It would have been so easy to add them, but God of War didn't, and that's great. Overall, the writing certainly gives a very specific mythologic flair to the whole experience. The beginning of the game is especially effective.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me. Now there is no hope.
And Kratos cast himself from the highest mountain in all of Greece. After 10 years of suffering, 10 years of endless nightmares, it would finally come to an end. Death would be his escape from madness.
It is followed by a massive tutorial set piece. That is certainly a great way to start the game. And after establishing our goals, God of War always makes sure they're always in our sight, with every step of the journey bringing us closer and closer to them. By the way, this game has no subtitles and cutscenes. There were a lot of games without those in this era. I think the reasoning was that not having subtitles was making them more cinematic or something. Sadly, no re-release has included those either, which is definitely an accessibility misstep. Anyway, out of all possible scores for context, I will assign an 8. God of War is a well-crafted violent tragedy based on Greek mythology. It's not complex, but it is well structured and keeps you engaged and invested. And really, there is nothing more one can ask from a game. Time to discuss aesthetics. This is another category with the weight of 1, as it's again about things that enhance the experience rather than define it, this time through visual style, music, sounds, etc. God of War should be commended for its straightforwardness, because when it comes to aesthetics, just like with context and gameplay, the game had one main goal, and that's epicness. Did the game succeed in this? I mean, you tell me. would say it certainly did. This game just oozes epicness. It is so epic that epicness is ready to burst out of my body while playing it. God of War regularly wants to make sure that you see just how small you are in comparison to all these huge environments. And then at the end of the game it makes you huge and you literally see the whole game map within the confines of one battle arena. The music keeps pumping you up with its orchestral beats, but also the game doesn't forget to put more contemplative or sometimes creepy tracks where necessary. Amidst this amount of epicness and polish, aspects that don't meet that level of quality stand out a lot. For example, the UI menus. I get the motifs of blood and bronze, but it all just feels very dirty, not fitting for a game that goes for such an epic scope. There is also a matter of some characters not having good voice acting, which is important considering how relatively few speaking roles there are in the game.
So, you think you can conquer the Temple of the Gods, do you? It's never been done, you know. Sooner or later, the Harpies will bring what's left of you back for me to burn.
Though the most important characters are voiced great.
A grave? In the middle of a battle? Who will occupy it, old man?
You will, my son. Oh, I've got a lot of digging to do indeed. All will be revealed in good time. And when all appears to be lost, Kratos, I will be there to help.
Sometimes the sound design gets really repetitive. For example, at first it's really cool to hear yells of people falling into the realm of Hades. But then you sort of get tired of it because it's the same small set of sounds over and over again. Also, I'm sorry I can't help but mention it, but this is not how breasts work. They're not perfect spheres attached to women's bodies. I say, if you're going to have shown breasts as a titillating selling point, that even the most important female character in the game has a see-through shirt, then at the very least make them look right. All in all, should we open up all the scores for aesthetics, I will assign a 9. While God of War certainly delivers on the epicness, it falters in noticeable contrasting ways a bit too many times. The next category is Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2, and it's about how well the game connects all of its different aspects together to create a wholesome, cohesive experience. Now, we can certainly say that God of War has a very consistent direction it follows and very specific goals it wants to reach as an experience. It is an epic, violent Greek myth. If there is anything we have learned is that all the different facets of the game we have discussed follow that direction and work together really well, despite a number of flaws here and there. But, not this one, but there is a lot of very gamey arbitration. And in the context of this category, gamey doesn't mean that it has elements that make it feel like a game. I mean, we are playing games, of course they feel like games, but rather that something exists just because it's a game and doesn't really have any explanation beyond that. Sometimes no explanation is needed. For example, there are orbs that fly out of enemies, they refill your health and magic, some give you experience points, and those are red like blood. They're abstractions, but also in the context of what the game is, they don't need justification in the first place. An example of what does need justification though are the very unclear rules about Kratos' power and what he can or can't do. While technically Kratos is immortal, obviously due to the blessings of the gods he can do things no other mortals can. That's fine. But let's say, what can he actually destroy? Well, early on the game establishes that objects and obstacles made out of wood can be destroyed. So when you reach a door with a lock that has stone slabs on it, it is quite clear that you can't break it because of the stone. Except once you pass the first level, you encounter plenty of situations where you can clear rock rubbles and destroy whole statues. But some other stone that's in your way can't be destroyed and you have to go around. The game establishes that any surface with a crack on walls can be destroyed with your blades, but then you encounter a crack in the floor that, despite Kratos being able to attack the ground with blades, can't be destroyed by them. One has to go through a whole section to throw a rock on it. Then there is a matter of progression. Most powers you receive you don't find throughout the journey or by getting them from the bodies of dead tough enemies. No, they're just suddenly given to you by gods at seemingly random points. You've been doing just fine with a quest without their power, and then suddenly they apparate and tell you that, hey, you've been doing great, but you still need this ability, so here you go. It feels random and undeserved. And that's considering that the game has a really good example of how to receive an item, in the form of the Trident of Poseidon, which lets you swim underwater. You have gone through a whole set of challenges to get to it, and then after you receive the Trident, suddenly the environment is recontextualized, and locations that were inaccessible are now available to you. Now that's a great way to get a new ability, but it's also sort of an exception. There is a point in the game where you have to save the Oracle before she falls down. Now at first you can faff around for as long as you like, she will keep hanging there because there is a little puzzly thing that has to be solved. But then once you get past it onto a more linear path, well, now the game knows that, hey, you don't have to faff around anymore, so here's a timer. And while it would make sense that the Oracle can't hold on forever, the appearance and handling of the timer is not natural. I do really like one particular interaction with the circle button that I'm not going to spoil, as it happens almost at the very end of the game. But if you know, you know. Now that part is a tiny but very nice recontextualization of your controls that gives a bit more depth to the overall experience. Still, there's a lot of game arbitration in God of War, which is why I'm going to assign a 7 for Cohesion. The game overall is really good at pushing all of its aspects towards a certain direction, but a bunch of situations that feel very mechanical in nature prevent it from getting a higher score. Let's get to our final category, emotions. This category is the most subjective part of Stasocritic, but it has the second biggest weight, 3, as personal feelings matter a whole lot. Now, I think it's important to mention that back in the day I played exactly one classic God of War game, and that was Chains of Olympus. I think it was around 2017. I enjoyed it, but, you know, it didn't make me want to try out the other games. It is only after playing the 2018 God of War did I decide to go back and actually play through the rest of the series in 2019. And I will be absolutely honest, I don't know if I would have enjoyed them as much as I did if I hadn't played the soft reboot. And I wasn't even interested in the soft reboot at first due to my experience with Chains of Olympus, but my wife really wanted to play it, so we got it, and yeah, the rest is history, I suppose. While I try to talk about each category on its own merits with as many well-defined arguments as possible, this particular part is purely personal. And on a personal level, there is a totally different feeling you get from playing these games when you know they will lead to the Norse God of War adventure. Because that game plays with Kratos' personality from this original series so well, not abandoning and forgetting the character's past, but pushing the person in new directions for some exceptional development that was chilling even without playing these games, that I don't know if I would have enjoyed the original God of War games as much if I hadn't known the eventual destination. I suppose we'll never find out now. But I guess the first God of War game stands on its own well enough that even without experiencing the 2018 God of War, it would have been just as fun. It's hard to say. What isn't difficult though is the score of 9 that I will assign to this category. For the purposes of recording footage and taking notes, I played through the game a second time, and despite the flaws and some annoying spikes, it was a fun, visceral experience that honestly I wouldn't even mind replaying again at some point in the future. It's somewhat primal, I guess, but still satisfying. And with that, let's conclude our video. After all scores and their weights are taken into account, the first God of War gets a Stasocritic rating of 76. It's a really good game. A fun, violent action game with enough pinch of Greek tragedy to give it that special spice. I don't know what else to say. God of War is a very straightforward game that knows what it wants to do and totally goes for it, so I suppose it deserves a just as straightforward final conclusion. If you're not fond of excessive violence and primal rage, I don't know if you'll like the game. This is also probably not the best title to try out if you're in search of something very technical. While there certainly are aspects of skill mastery in God of War, for all intents and purposes it is a button masher. But if you're a fan of action games in general, there is no way you will regret playing God of War.